I'm going to introduce each one of my panelists, who are amazing, by reading their Twitter bio and then asking each one of them a question, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. And that way you'll get to know a little bit about them and how they got to the roles that they're in. To my left is Thomas Gensemer, Adland exec, entrepreneur, investor, wannabe interior designer, Politico, globe-trotting dreamer at Burson, Marstellar, and WPP by day, and Blue State Digital in the past. So I think we all know that Blue State Digital was one of the masterminds behind Obama's groundbreaking online campaign, and you were then the CEO of Blue State, and now you're what is somewhat of a traditional PR agency like Burson. And how do you take what you learned at Blue State and apply that to move Burson forward?
I think it's a similar lesson that we used as we broadened Blue State outside of politics and the NGO sector into the corporate world. And it was, one, sort of the definition of digital engagement. How do you draw people towards an action that is both memorable and measurable? How do you sort of build that into the organization? It's not just a piece of marketing. The reason I took the role at Burson within the sort of WPP world is because I think the owner of the corporate message and the protector and builder of corporate reputation is where social really needs to live. Versus, sorry to those of you in the marketing houses or the ad agencies that we all work with, but there needs to be a tighter integration there, because the story of the corporate brand and again, sort of the platform of the corporate reputation is really key. So we, from a Blue State perspective, it was honoring the relationship with that end user or that influencer and realizing that it was more than a moment in time. It was a relationship that builds. Now we are building it across many, many channels, but looking at integrated strategy toward that one person.
Fabulous. Next, we have David Richeson. I help people and brands connect to their own deeper purpose and to other people through holistic planning, social media, and life coaching. And there's a link to his life coaching website. So I'm fascinated by these two roles, and how one informs the other, but I'm not going to ask you that. That's not really fair. But you've led digital and social communications for both profit and not-for-profit world. And what can the two worlds learn from each other?
Well, those two questions actually come a lot together, because I fundamentally believe that companies are going to need to be about more than just creating widgets. In the future, we're seeing companies already like Charity Water, the social innovators, doing very well. So my time both with brands like Skype and Target and CVS, and now working with foundations, Avon Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and nonprofits, really seeing how we can help brands tell a larger story and a more meaningful and authentic story by doing things that are better for the world. So creating their widget and whatever they're building, but also showing how that adds value to the world. So this idea of a shared value model really is going to help propel whatever industry you're in forward.
And next we have Steve Rubel, who probably doesn't need an introduction. His bio reads, Chief Content Strategist for Edelman at Edelman PR, Ad Age columnist, LinkedIn influencer, and avid sports fan. So he's not a CDO, so I want to ask him to talk about his role and with respect to the content Edelman is creating for its clients. What is your role, and what does this mean?
Sure. So is this on? Okay, so my role basically is to look at disruptive opportunities in the content space, and to have basically kind of three-part function. One is to work on kind of major strategic initiatives that the firm feels are important, the executive committee feels important in the content landscape, such as our entry into the native advertising and sponsored content space. To work on IP projects and thought leadership and content development, and then to serve as a senior advisor to mostly our top accounts.
Great. And then finally, we have Scott Schneider. And I love, Scott doesn't publicly tweet, so I'm going to give you his LinkedIn profile. And I'm sure he doesn't publicly tweet because we do it all day for our clients, right? But he's an executive business leader working in digital innovation, multi-channel communications, and strategic business management. In 2013, he was named one of InSquare's top Innovator 25. So Scott, you started one of the first, if not the first, digital shops within a PR network. What shifts have you seen in the past 15 years while you've been at Richeson Studios?
So, Steve and I were just talking before the panel started, but the shifts they've mirrored the shifts of the internet. So, 15 years ago, you started off with a ancillary website with your biggest concern was getting the press release onto the right website. And, all of the content shifts on the internet have just, PR has been right there all the way to now. I think there was a point where we were ahead of the ad agencies, and I think maybe the ad agencies might have caught up. Maybe they're ahead, maybe they're not. We'll talk about that too, I think, some more. And what's interesting is for me to think about not just, talking about starting the press release, but what is the content of the future going to be? So we know the Internet of Things is coming, and it's coming fast. And wearables is here and approaching even faster. We have a 3D printer, a MakerBot 2 at work, so we're constantly prototyping things. But will the new content in 3-4 years be when my fridge talks to my car? Will that be a piece of content that I put up? Will that be a piece of content that everybody's putting up? Everybody's putting up their fridge talking to their car. And that's the thing that we'll be dealing with. So I get very excited thinking about where we've been, but kind of where we're going to.
Fabulous.
Your fridge should call my fridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. What would they say?
That would be much more interesting, right?
Make sure that we arrange that.
So some in the industry have called 2014 the year of native advertising or content marketing, and I just want to get the panel's thoughts, and you tell us how you define content marketing, or is this something new or something that's been around?
Well, I'll start. I think those are two different phrases that, and actually the IAB particularly has tried to define those through working groups as two different but related topics. So I view one as kind of an enabler of the other, in both ways. So the native advertising, let me take that one first. Okay. That is a transformative event that is happening because of mostly external factors, and it's a publisher driven phenomenon versus a marketer driven phenomenon. So I think there's a number of conditions, including programmatic buying, including mobile consumption, including business models that have worked on different platforms that are kind of leading the media to adopt that as a future business state. And then I think marketers are kind of looking at those opportunities and figuring out what they are. The flip side then is, I think the mirror image of that is content marketing. And that is driven by a confidence and a realization by brands that they can tell their own story in their own voice and in their own way, because quite frankly, many of them have done that over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years on social media. And there's a confidence now that they can do that at scale. So now I think those two go together very nicely, because the reality is that what I'm worried about is that a lot of brands are going to invest in building content-rich programs, and no one's going to come view them or watch them or engage with them, because it's just the reality is there's a lot of stars in the sky, and people are not necessarily connecting dots. And so we have to, that's why I look at the native advertising opportunities, which we're calling sponsored content because we like to be a little bit fancier. Because native
the agency's keeping their role in it.
Yeah, well, native advising to us sounds like, I don't know. I mean,
going native.
Yeah, I don't know. It's things that probably I shouldn't say.
Yeah.
But we're looking at that as kind of an opportunity for us to find new avenues and reach for that kind of content, and to look at that holistically.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Sure.
Because I think that the problem is when you start thinking about things fractionally, like you said, this is our content and marketing strategy. This is our native advertising strategy. At the end of the day, what's your brand story? First, and it has to be at the company level, right? Mm-hmm. And what's your brand story? And then if you realize that every single thing you do, whether you're putting out a new product, whether you put out a press release, whether you put out a tweet, whether you put out a video, whatever you're doing, whether you put out something on BuzzFeed, is part of that brand story. And how is that enhancing your brand story? How are you listening to what people care about with your company, and what are the current pain points? How are you responding to that with all those different tools you have? And then how do you listen again to respond? So, all these little things are tools, and they're important. So, little 5-minute videos, little vines, ways of native advertising, those are all great, but if you don't really understand what your brand story is and what people are saying about you today and how you're trying to move that conversation, you're just throwing stuff at the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit more about, as you referred to, the story of the corporation or the brand story. And I've thrown up a slide here of Coke's website. And a little over a year ago, Coke announced that they were reviving an internal print magazine in a digital form and relaunching their website. And I'm just saying this for people who don't know. The new site called Coke Journey was a socially enabled digital platform that was meant to strictly tell the Coke story as opposed to being their corporate website. And in the first year that they've been up, they published 2 or 3 stories a day and 1,200 pieces of content. So what does this mean as a brand, as a storyteller? This is a great example.
I think what's key on this, we do a small bit of this work. There's a lot of people involved in a big team at Coke. So it is, unfortunately, for those of us representing agencies and agency P&Ls.
I did not know it was your work.
There's a blessing and a curse to this. It's not enough of our work. They do a lot of in-house. This is actually the CocaColaCompany.com. This is their corporate site. And if you look up here on the upper left, you see you can link to the investor site. That's what it used to be. It was the investor site. So they realized that the brand and culture had a very big footprint, and it wasn't just about telling the story of Coke and the red can. Right. This is, your Coke-themed wedding. That's sort of a fun piece. That they can. The movement is happiness is the next thing of like their physical fitness activities, and the content really ranges broadly. It is now a global mandate that all of it's going to be a global storytelling platform. A lot of brands come to people like us and ask for, see this is the latest trend, and see this to do it. But to get to Steve's point, Coke is a big footprint, so people see it. People are going to CocaCola.com. There's a lot of brands that their would-be investor site or their corporate site simply isn't trafficked, so you put this amount of resource behind it, well, it seems like, upon your 1-year review, what have you done? So that's where it gets into sort of how did the content here fit in other potential avenues and audiences. But this is really a broad look at a corporate reputation play that I think has been done very well and has been quite successful for them internally.
And I would just add that not many companies could pull this off. So we're talking about a small amount of companies that could do that. And if you're a next tier down, I'm not going to pick any company's names, but it would be much harder to tell your story and to make it relevant. And I think the next level of this will be when a company like Coke, someone at that level, puts up their own house of cards. A piece of content that is unique, that is truly storytelling outside the brand but connected to the brand, that drive people to their own property because the content is that good.
I actually don't know if I'm not agree with that. I mean, I think any company can tell their own story and make it relevant. I mean, look at like Dollar Shave Club and what they did. It's if you can think of a creative way to tell your story and get it out there.
Agreed, but could Dollar Shave, could they have a website? And
no. I mean, but I'm saying how to tell your story and make it relevant.
Oh, I agree. Everybody can tell the story.
Big website that everybody's going to go to.
I think a lot of us, though, are too confident in our abilities to do this well.
I agree.
I mean, because look, let's look at the competition. The competition isn't Coke versus Pepsi. The competition is Angry Birds. It's Candy Crush. It's media properties. It's Hollywood. It's Bollywood. I mean, it's broad, and so we come at this somewhat, I think, a little wide-eyed in our ability to say that, sure, we can do this. Now, for brands that have a connection and an ongoing relevance and an ongoing conversation or high interest, I think they could do that. But to your point, not everyone's going to pull this off. And so what the real trend that we're going to see develop over the next 2 to 3 years is what I'm kind of calling unholy alliances. We're going to see a lot of companies that you would never think about getting together to work together. And the model for this is Pitbull. I mean, he seems to collaborate with every different artist, and you hear his voice as a track in every song. And that's kind of a great model that we should be thinking about as communicators, because it is about surface area. And for us to try to get surface area alone is going to be, could Coke do it? Yes. But unless you have a significantly large media budget and you put it towards content development and amplification, I think that we're going to have to kind of look at how we partner to create surface area. Yep.
So because we're in PR, I'm not going to swear, but all the people in this room who are CDOs are sitting there going, what do I do first? how do I get started in brand publishing? Is that your advice, to find somebody to have a unholy alliance with, or is there some other practical thing you can tell them?
Well, I think what you said is right. Is it starts with a narrative.
Yep.
What is it going to be? What kind of value are you creating in the what kind of value are you creating? The unmet need, if you will, that has to be fulfilled. What do people want to know more about? And I think there's a lot of niches that have not been served yet that could be served by brands, because publishers maybe don't find them to be monetarily viable, let's just say, or financially viable. So one is, it starts with your narrative, and after that, I think you have to think about how the audience is going to find that content and how engaged they're going to be. Your ability to wrap your message in a broader narrative is really important. I think cause and bigger higher order topics is certainly one way to do that. GE and Ideas Lab is a great example of that, and this is a partnership with Atlantic Media. And then tapping into the expertise that the publishers have, which they're all turning they have teams now that are set up to be studios to serve the marketers directly. Friend of me, if you will. And then obviously looking at how we make sure that those stories are discoverable.
Yeah.
But it starts with what void are you filling? Don't just talk about you. What is the unmet need that has to be fulfilled?
Well, and listen and respond to trends and what's going on in the world, right? So I go back to listening, because that's super, super important. You have to be out there and thinking about what's going on and how is that relevant to your brand story, and then how do you piggyback, or how do you insert yourself into conversations that are already going on that are relevant.
And from a PR perspective, getting used to your brand in a bigger context, I think, is a big process of self-discovery that brands and companies and sort of bureaucracies need to go through. One of the things that you and I share in our past is Ford. 5 or 6 years ago, Ray Day at Ford, who's the head of comms, said, "I'm no longer just talking to the automotive trades." And he set a sort of what seemed at the time a relatively arbitrary goal of 70% of the clips have to come from lifestyle media, so not auto trades. That's a big change.
A sea change.
That's a very big thing for an entity like that to go through, and it wasn't a natural fit to begin with. But then you begin to look at the broadening story of that enterprise and others. It's the same journey that Coke had to go through, journey. That's why they called it Journey, I guess. But to get that comfort both internally and with your agency is, I think, a big process that people don't fully anticipate being as rocky as it could be.
But interestingly, the marketing side, wouldn't we argue, had always been going after lifestyle. So I think that's where we see our two disciplines kind of blending together. We've thrown up this GE's Idea Labs just because here it's really more about curating. So what are your thoughts? Is it more important to curate content, create content? I hope that's not me.
There you are, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, all the above.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah, you have to curate, create. You've got to be, anything you can do to. Again, you're part of a conversation. What do you do when you're part of a conversation? You don't just talk. You don't just listen. You think about what the most interesting thing is. Oh, when he said and what he said. You have to think about it like you're now in a large conversation with that is global. And how do you? Same way you participate in a large conversation as a person, you should think about that as a brand.
And I think also, and I think David Ching had said that, your audience has an audience. So that, ideally you create content that your audience then curates and houses in their collection. But I think it also would depend on company to company and brand to brand. I think that making things culturally relevant, and if you look at what gets shared and what gets touched online, I mean, we talk about TV a lot, and I can talk about TV a lot because it seems to drive, I feel like, 60% of the conversation at times on the internet. Just Game of Thrones on certain days will drive half the conversation. So if your brand is appropriately connected to a cultural motif, I think then I would say go with it, create something. But if you can curate around a motif, it might be better. So I would agree that it's both, but it really depends on who you are and what you're doing.
The main thing that PR is going to bring to the table here, I don't know if this is getting ahead of the panel flow here, is a sensibility for when you should step on the brakes and when you should step on the gas. Because there's just certain times that you just, not that the marketers don't know that, but I don't think they have the real time or gut instinct to know when to do that, because they're not charged with paying attention to the daily zeitgeist around a lot of different topics.
Right.
And that's really important, and the journalistic sensibility here is is critical. I mean, it's critical, especially in working with the publishers. And the publishers seem to be very enthusiastic as it relates to native advertising and working with the PR side because they feel like they have the best chance to quote unquote get it right. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch and how kind of PR comes to the table with this, knowing when to promote and when to protect.
Yep.
So we're going to flip, and I don't want everyone to think we're pandering to Ford.
Oh,
but
sorry.
We talked offline, our group, and we started talking about what's work that we really like. And Thomas mentioned that, and I think he wasn't intimately involved in this, the Team Detroit was, but how an offhand remark by Jimmy Fallon that he was looking to buy a truck. Within minutes of doing that, Ford had tweeted at Jimmy Fallon that he should get a Ford F-150 King Ranch, and it set off this whole social media battleground amongst the automotive manufacturers. So let's talk about that. Why did you pick this as an example of great work?
I think it speaks to the integration between the above-the-line and below-the-line agencies. For one, when it gets to the actual production, the publisher, Jimmy Fallon, The Tonight Show, there was a pre-existing media relationship that obviously helps cultivate conversations about what more we could do instead of the 30-second spot. So you know, working with the above-the-line agency to figure out where those opportunities exist. And then Ford engaged, which is not always the easiest thing to do in the ownership model that Ford dealers are, 10 regional dealers to come and pitched an on-air competition for Jimmy that they had to, whoever would, I think it was on the Intrepid.
It was on the Intrepid.
They had to be touching the truck for, you know, for, I don't know how long it was, 2 days or something. Yeah. And the one that survived that physical challenge the longest would be the person who does the sale. So it started with a, you know, in the community management team on the PR side of the house, hey, Jimmy Fallon just mentioned something, and you could see the cycles working into place. Right. And the brand was willing to go with it. So, I mean, there's many examples of this. The thing that I particularly like is more and more we're seeing the, you know, people at NBC and the producers at Good Morning America being willing to sort of top up your media investment with something that would be more akin to a PR program. And that's where synergies really, really can become magical.
Anybody else have any comments about this kind of approach?
Well, it talks to exactly what we were saying, right? Listening,
yeah, exactly.
And then actually finding a great way to respond, and then, you know, working holistically with the rest of your agencies and with you know, brands.
My only 2 cents is, and we've done some of those things too, is that they're great, and a lot of these things tend to be the first time you do them, they're great, second time, and then the danger is how do you know, you build on that as a staple thing, you pull out,
yeah,
you know,
be flexible.
Yeah, if you can get there first with an idea like that, and we find more and more TV producers, especially late night people, willing to do more things, it's a great opportunity, and then trying to think of how you piggyback the next thing.
So I have a client who's really desperate for content, and his solution is we need more user-generated content. So we have a couple examples up here. On the left is Rent the Runway, and they use women who've actually rented a dress to be advocates for that dress and talk about how they wore it and how it fit. And then on the right, we have a B2B example where Siemens, to support their corporate social responsibility initiative, asked young filmmakers to create stories about innovations for sustainable cities. So my question would be, you know, we hear this term content is currency, and UGC, is it the most valuable currency? And would we recommend this to our clients? Does this solve our, I'm asking 4 questions, solve our content breach? We need more content? Is this the way to go?
Well, I think we saw, you know, recently, I think it was Mashable just put this out, that, you know, millennials listen to user-generated content 50% more than any other kind of content and trust it pretty much more than any other kind of content. So I think it's important, but again, it depends on the brand. For Skype, we did something similar, but we would just listen to anyone who said anything about Skype. I had my baby over Skype. I did things like that, and then we'd actually go and, you know.
You had your baby over Skype?
I personally had my baby over Skype.
I don't know what's more amazing about that. You had a baby, or you had a baby over Skype?
Like a military dad would see his baby for the first time over Skype.
I'm just, you know,
find that out.
I'm still comprehending it.
Go talk to the person who said that,
right,
and then actually create a story. Either have them write the story, or we'd write the story, and then put that out as part of our content form. So just thinking about how do you do that, finding the people who really care and are really, you know, really are passionate about your brand, and then giving them different creative ways to create content, I think is great.
Look, I like the approach that you're separating art from junk, and you're putting, my finger paintings are not in the museums here, and that's for a reason. And there's works of art that are there, so that's smart. But what we're seeing is that more and more people want to have some degree of authority around that. They want somebody to be really, and that's why we were talking before about these independent. These new journalism sites that are being formed around individual thought leaders who develop a passion and an expertise in a given topic, and then they build media brands around them, whether it be a Nate Silver or
Glenn Greenwald.
Right, that's another good example. And those folks, and I actually think you could have people from the brand side be people like that. It's not easy, but I think they could do that. And if they're able to curate content from the community and help you separate what's important. And this goes back to, the early blogging days in the, in the early 2000s, which is essentially what they were doing, is that they were separating art from junk. We need people who are going to be those conveners and to really kind of be those voices on what to pay attention to and to provide some perspective. Because otherwise, I mean, the reality is that, yes, this solves the content problem. But I don't feel like there's a... this is not a, we don't have a supply problem. We have a demand problem.
So Thomas, he's saying brands can't be the convener. You need an independent.
They can, but I think you need somebody who's going to come in and be that expert voice and be the authority within that, whether that is somebody who you contract to do that, who's an independent influencer, or that is somebody, ideally from your own corporation, who's going to do that. Because otherwise you're just kind of surfacing information.
You have to curate.
And it has a danger of becoming a dumping ground.
And I think when we get back to sort of the future of PR and what the agency does, those personalities, in yesteryear we hired the spokesperson. It was a singular person, maybe it was a little celeb, maybe it was a doctor of sorts. We're now casting a far broader set of influencers to control something. The other piece that you touched on was something like this. I'm doing more and more work in the hotel space, and a hotel brand that I won't mention but owns thousands of properties recently convened something like this of what is the innovation you would add to your hotel room. Really smart. People travel a lot. But to get the level of quality that both makes it an interesting program for someone, looking at that hotel property, or even more so, an innovation that you would actually put into practice for that hotel, requires some real hand-holding. So it's not like you can just create these sites and ask people to submit quality stuff and magic's going to fall from the sky. You really need to, let the bar really low for initial inputs. I have an idea. Then work with those people to develop quality content. Totally. I think that's a real switch for an agency to source, as opposed to the creative heads in a room somewhere developing big ideas. Really be canvassing, listening, and then pick an individual and really commit resources to developing that person's idea. That's a switch for all of us in both the planning process and then how the brand procures things. So I think it's interesting. There's a lot of people out there that are able to commit interesting content, but it's a two-way street. We can't just open the doors and expect it's going to flood.
And what you're seeing is brands who are developing this brand journalism models, we're calling it, is having an editor-in-chief.
Absolutely.
Sometimes from publications, print publications, then learning how to do this digital editing for brands.
Right.
And I think that Siemens example is one where they had the ideas submitted and then they actually used these filmmakers to bring it to life.
Right.
So they needed to plus it up. Let's talk about publishers as agencies, and I think Steve touched on this quite a bit. Are media companies such as the New York Times native ad platform or Wall Street Journal content studios, Guardian Labs, going to become the new agencies? Are they going to disintermediate us?
Well, they're a scary bunch, because they have formidable content capabilities that arguably, especially if they deploy resources the right way, and people jump over from the edit side, which I haven't seen a lot of, but it's happening some. That's powerful. They got distribution. Okay, that's no, they got that. But I think what they lack is a total view of the ecosystem and how their goal is to make their properties more valuable. So they're focused on, and I'm going to use a monopoly metaphor here. They're saying, okay, we have Park Place, and we're going to make that, the best, most valuable property on the board. We don't give a damn about the rest of the board, especially that cat character. And we're thinking about the whole board.
Right.
And so they, so we're looking at, what do we do in one place that creates movement on the other side of the board? And we're looking, and it's very fluid in nature. So they're looking to agencies to be a partner there, to be also an expert on the client. But I can see brands certainly going directly to these studios because they offer content and distribution services. And I also think they're very competitive with each other right now, and so they're certainly looking at how to outmuscle each other on pricing, which still is all over the map.
So are there disruptive opportunities that PR agencies can take advantage of in this ecosystem? How can we make this work for our own benefit?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year, we've seen, I forget which company did this already, but if the publishers start to actually form their own PR agencies.
Right.
And say, okay, great, we'll start we'll start with creating something on our own property, and then we have a whole other agency that's charged with activating this and making sure it gets out there and gets noticed. I think or they'll have an unholy alliance with a PR company. We'll see more of that in the future because the danger is they're islands unto themselves.
Right.
And to that point, it's a bit of it's disingenuous business model, a little bit. We talked about journalism early on, I'm a son of a journalist, so there is a bit of a conflict at heart for these organizations. And I agree with everything that Steve says about what they have, and they are formidable, but can they pull that off? Will their core target audience say, you know what, this is slightly abhorrent to your core mission here, what's going on, and can they sustain that? And I'm not sure they can, and that I guess will be played out.
It's not the old separation of church and state, as we used to say.
The definition is changing all the time. I mean, my challenge, crassly speaking, is do these media companies want to have the sheer body count that it takes to manage one of these businesses? Right. I mean, we have our friend from Unilever here, and he's mentioned here with The Guardian. There's a lot of client executives sitting around servicing Unilever brands that The Guardian may not want to pick up that head count. And so if the expectations of the brand in their servicing doesn't change, yes, there is a potential here, but there's still some tensions.
One thing that's been overlooked, though, in the rise of native advertising and sponsored content is that, truthfully, with the exception of display, I'm going to argue that display was not really a inherently viable business model. I think it got us to where we had to get to. I think it was but it was kind of it kind of grew out of TV. And when you look at what's happened over the years, I mean, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Tumblr, their business model is take the editorial product and flip it, create a mirror image that's an ad product, and everyone's doing that's the new business model, and that's arguably Google AdWords and search results are basically mirror images of each other. So the media now, I think, is catching up, and they're saying the way we did it before is not, for a lot of reasons, not going to be the most viable way to do this. We have to find a similar approach. The problem is for them that there's a preconceived notion that's been set. The audience has an expectation. The ads are here, the content is here, and the two don't, they don't blend in any way. Whereas and that's why I think BuzzFeed was able to do what they did, because they had a complete reset. And I think that businesses that are mobile first in nature is a complete reset. They don't have to worry about a legacy. So the ones that are, one thing we might see the media do is create new brands. Like New York Times Now is a great example of that, where they can actually create a blended approach and slowly start to transition that work over.
Any other thoughts on that? So we're going to flip gears a little bit to this notion where it seems to be happening a lot in the last year or so, where people use events or stunts that PR is usually pretty good at mounting. They stage these type of events, but then the way that they really amplify them is a video goes viral. So we have a few examples here. The WestJet one, I think everyone's seen that. It's got 36 million views. The Pepsi bus shelter where people touch hands and it heats up the bus shelter. It's got 6 million views, or that was Duracell. Pepsi Max was augmented reality. So this is a place where I feel like PR agencies have always played in experiential events that get press. And what do we think about this trend where now, I should have had my mic put lower, where now the way that we're getting eyeballs is through having these events become a viral video?
Well, I think, one of the things I talk about a lot is what's the definition of an event, and we need to rethink what an event is, and then rethink how do people participate in that event. Not only how do we record it and, and then amplify it, but then how do people participate in it when it's happening? So whether that's your traditional event, and now we're seeing with second screen and TV, and there's a million things that are going to happen with that. But then how do you make that event more interesting with like 4D technologies like augmented reality and things like that? How do you, and then how do you then amplify that? So I think we're going to be thinking about what an event is and then how people participate in that, real happening virtually a lot moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I would say that these are actually positive, and we're actually pitching a lot of these. People are seeking proxy experiences online, I think, constantly in many different ways, and this is one way to do it. So when I saw that Pepsi Max video of the augmented reality bus stop, I thought, that's really, really cool, and you see the people jump up, and the tiger comes. What's also interesting, and Coke did this on Valentine's Day in South America as a pilot, I don't remember where, they had a virtual vending machine on the wall. If you walk by, nothing would happen. If a couple walk by, it activates, and then it kind of comes to life. But what's interesting is that you could do a pilot program in a secondary market, do something very interesting, not too much money. If it works out, that's great. You have this video, you can kind of really blow it out. If it doesn't work out, no harm, no foul. It's not on a national stage or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So these, I think, are actually, we'll see more and more of them, and I'm really into them.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any comments?
No, I would agree, especially on the you can go into, as opposed to the experiential firm that just sort of does everything in Times Square and commits huge budgets to something that may not be all that interactive. You can pop up with things in second-tier cities that still have the same impact or more. So that is,
Can I add one more thing to that, actually?
Of course.
What an event is, because eventually, I didn't bring my phone, I'll have it on here, but eventually you'll be able to take your phone at point of purchase, and I have an app right now that does this, can scan what your thing is without the scanning bar, just recognize what the product is, and then create an event there. Create something like that tiger or something that's interesting, or you could hear what your friends think about it. There's a million things that can happen. So the idea of what do you do at a real point, and then how does technology, whether that's Google Glass, whether that's your app, how does that enhance that moment? I think that's really what you need to be thinking about. And then how do you then take your social graph information and then input that on it and to sort of give you more information about that moment or that brand? That's really where this is going.
I have a lot more questions, but I think it's a good time to make sure that the audience gets to ask these great guys questions. So are there any questions in our audience right now? Oh, we're in the back.
Standing between lunch.
I was just about to say, it's dangerous,
Hi, thanks. I'm Dorian Benquil. I'm trying to call up, I actually made a note to myself, and I'm trying to call it up. Steve, you had mentioned the thing that brands need to find is to find the unmet need that needs to be filled because maybe it's a niche that publishers haven't found profitable. Do you have any specific niches in mind? I'm very curious what those niches you think might be that a brand or someone that you deal with might be interested in doing content for that a publisher wouldn't be interested in.
Well, one area that's really rich, Dorian, is how-to. There's a whole. People want to know how to do certain things, and it doesn't have to be a big, giant, sweeping topic like how to get the most out of your technology or how to travel. There's lots of little niches in how-to content that people are obsessed with that they want to know more about. That go very deep and aligned with a branded topic that maybe for a media company to build an entire site around, they're not going to have enough advertisers to substantiate that. But a brand could be the hero in kind of convening and curating all of that content in one place. And, you know, and there's been brands that have done that over the years with recipes. But that is an advertiser-rich area because of all the food companies that want to go into that. But I think that there are micro niches that could be fulfilled with how-to in particular, that it's not going to be a magical formula where you do this and tomorrow you're going to get more sales. It's built. But I think that is something that over time could just create more value and position you very squarely in the center of that. That's a rich area in particular, is how-to.
Other question right here.
Hi, Christophe Jamay, DDG. I think you guys started talking and touching a little bit on employee-driven content, and that kind of falls into the wheelhouse of influencer identification, influencer engagement, and it kind of ties into what Google's doing with authorship and stuff like that. So I guess two-part question. One, what brands do you think have done that well, leveraging employees who create organic content around their field of expertise, and where do you think it's going?
Did you see the last video from Southwest? The Southwest, I've seen like several of them. The flight attendants who create their own intro to, I think that's a great example where they basically have said, okay, you have to say this, 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 and this, but say it however you want and have fun. And I've seen 4 or 5 different incarnations of that, and they're always brilliant, and they get a million hits, and it makes you feel like, wow, flying on Southwest is fun. I should fly on Southwest next time. I think that's a great example of that.
Microsoft's done that well too with Microsoft Stories, their site, which kind of really shows the people and the passion behind the products, especially from a design standpoint. And it's you know, it's a bit of a snowfalls treatment to the content, but it's extraordinarily well done.
I think IBM has deployed, they use LinkedIn quite well, sort of what LinkedIn calls Influencer 2.0, it's sort of the second tier of influencers. And IBM has something like 400 employees, sort of regular committing content, and it's been really successful.
And the IBM Blur, their Tumblr is amazing.
Agency sites too, there's a few agencies, including ours, that have...
Somehow I knew you were going to say that. Are there other questions? Yeah, in the back here.
Hi, Ken Cragen. I'm going to be talking tonight at 5 o'clock about the building of events, and I'm curious with you folks, because it's so much focused on digital because of the nature of this conference, but how do you interface in your own operations and with your clients to make sure the digital experience is only one of the experiences that the consumer is getting? I'll talk a lot about that, how you have to surround and come at consumers from multiple directions, and that the digital space is only really one of the maybe the central one, but if you don't build around that, it becomes one event. I'm just curious how you handle that internally and also with your clients.
The core of it is, I think we've been saying for 10 years that it's the year of the mobile, but we can probably all agree that it's the year of the mobile.
Is it here?
And that being the touch point that people have in their pocket at the concert or at the car dealership or at the whatever is incredibly key, not only for data capture, which sort of positions them within. If you look at what MLB is doing in some stadiums with Beacon, and not only can they deliver popcorn to the seat that they know you're in, but there's lots of other opportunities that open around that. I think this, though a digital touch point, is far more tethered to the real life experience, that the data ecosystem seems to make sense now, as opposed to being, well, how do we get their mobile number or their email address upon registration, and sort of all the awkwardness seems to be removed. The friction is being removed by real-time experiences on the mobile, which then open up into broader digital experiences.
I talk a lot more about holistic planning than I talk about digital itself. So I don't think about digital as one lever. I think it does give us a whole new landscape to play with and a whole new way of thinking about things. So that's important, but everything has to be built holistically and thought about as one experience from the very beginning, or you've already lost.
Do you, Steve or Scott, have anything?
Nope, I agree. Yeah.
I disagree. It's not the year of mobile.
This is not the year of mobile. That happened already.
That's next year.
Any other questions in the audience? Okay.
Oh, one more.
Yep. Now she's standing between us and lunch.
Sorry.
Better be good.
No.
Maybe she's going to ask what's for lunch.
Actually, it's a big question, but I'll try to make it short. So I'm a publisher, an independent publisher. And I would far rather offer content, high-quality sponsored content, than display advertising. However, I don't have a studio, and I can't scale to create it. And nor when I talk to brands and agencies do I find that they're willing to customize content for us at the scale that we offer. How do you see the industry dynamics shifting that I can start taking advantage of in the next year to, I mean, possibly agencies like yours are the answer to work with you directly, but how do you see these dynamics shifting that are going to let me take advantage of the, of serving sponsored content? Do you understand my question?
I think so. But it sounds like you have two issues, if I may. One is on how you sell, and then the other is on how you create at a quality that you want, that you feel is going to be acceptable to you.
Correct. It's mostly the sell part, because we'll find a way to deliver and implement, but if we don't offer the scale on the sales, then we don't have a business. So
ad tech is your friend. I think. And there's a whole group of companies that have kind of come in to try to get in between folks like us and folks like you in a good way, and automate that and to take the friction out of it. So whether it be Empowered or
Outbrain.
Outbrain's at a more contextual level, or Share-Through, or Nativo, or Native Lift, or there's just, I mean, every day, Adam Hirsch, who's a former Mashable executive who works with us now, every day, we're joking if there's another company that we'd never heard of. That Polar is another one that seems to have locked up a lot of the publishers. So there's now, you may not like that because one is a little less control, two is, well, they take a piece of the revenue. So, but there seems, as an interim solution, that seems to be there, and they have a lot of that down to a science. And then on the creation side too, there's a whole other army of people, whether it be Contently, that are, or I'm blanking on the other name.
Skyward,
that are basically, just add water and you get content. Kinds of solutions. So there's a lot of, now again, whether that's a long-term solution for you is another story, but it's certainly a short-term one that a lot of the publishers seem to have found.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. I want to give our panel a round of applause and let everyone get to lunch, I think.